Before I could process it, the floor shook with heavy, rapid footsteps pounding up the basement stairs. They hit the door hard, the chair scraping an inch across the floor as the wood buckled. I lunged forward, throwing my weight against it, my shoulders screaming in protest. Whatever was on the other side shoved back, grunting with effort, the door rattling in its frame. It wasn't the wind. This was real, alive, and strong. I yelled, "Get out of my house!" But it only seemed to make them push harder. My phone was still in my pocket. I fumbled it out with one hand, keeping my body braced against the door, and dialed 911. The moment I hit call, the pressure stopped. Footsteps retreated down the stairs, fast and uneven, fading into silence. I didn't wait. I bolted for the front door, grabbed my keys, and ran to my car through the pouring rain. I locked myself inside and peeled out, parking a block away where I could still see the house. The cops showed up 15 minutes later, 3 of them sweeping the place with flashlights and guns drawn. They found the back door ajar, muddy boot prints smeared across the kitchen floor, leading from the basement. No one was there. They asked about the text I'd gotten, and when they traced it, it wasn't from any utility company. It came from a burner phone, untraceable. The power wasn't even out on my street. Someone had flipped the main breaker in the basement while I was at work, then waited. The worst part? They found a duffel bag stashed behind the furnace, rope, duct tape, and a hunting knife inside. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing through. They'd planned this, known my routine, my number, my house. The cops think they slipped out when I went to the car, vanishing into the storm. That was 3 weeks ago. No arrests, no leads. I've been staying at Jake's since, but I still drive by the house sometimes, watching from the street. Last night, my phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. "Missed you." Before I could process it, the floor shook with heavy, rapid footsteps pounding up the basement stairs. They hit the door hard, the chair scraping an inch across the floor as the wood buckled. I lunged forward, throwing my weight against it, my shoulders screaming in protest. Whatever was on the other side shoved back, grunting with effort, the door rattling in its frame. It wasn't the wind. This was real, alive, and strong. I yelled, "Get out of my house!" But it only seemed to make them push harder. My phone was still in my pocket. I fumbled it out with one hand, keeping my body braced against the door, and dialed 911. The moment I hit call, the pressure stopped. Footsteps retreated down the stairs, fast and uneven, fading into silence. I didn't wait. I bolted for the front door, grabbed my keys, and ran to my car through the pouring rain. I locked myself inside and peeled out, parking a block away where I could still see the house. The cops showed up 15 minutes later, 3 of them sweeping the place with flashlights and guns drawn. They found the back door ajar, muddy boot prints smeared across the kitchen floor, leading from the basement. No one was there. They asked about the text I'd gotten, and when they traced it, it wasn't from any utility company. It came from a burner phone, untraceable. The power wasn't even out on my street. Someone had flipped the main breaker in the basement while I was at work, then waited. The worst part? They found a duffel bag stashed behind the furnace, rope, duct tape, and a hunting knife inside. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing through. They'd planned this, known my routine, my number, my house. The cops think they slipped out when I went to the car, vanishing into the storm. That was 3 weeks ago. No arrests, no leads. I've been staying at Jake's since, but I still drive by the house sometimes, watching from the street. Last night, my phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. "Missed you." It was late September, and my buddy Sam and I had decided to take a long weekend to go camping up in the Adirondacks. We'd been on a handful of trips before, mostly to state parks with RV hookups and families grilling hot dogs. But this time, we wanted the real deal. You know, something rugged, remote, the kind of place you'd see in a survival show. I'd just turned 30 and Sam was coming off a rough breakup, so we figured a few days in the wild might clear our heads. We weren't pros by any stretch, but we'd watched enough YouTube tutorials to feel cocky about it. After some digging online, we settled on a spot about 4 hours north of Albany, deep in the mountains. The site was a 6-mile hike from the nearest road, tucked into a valley with a killer view of the peaks. The few reviews we found were old, mostly from hardcore backpackers, and the photos showed a rocky clearing surrounded by dense pine forest. Perfect. We packed for 3 nights, tents, sleeping bags, a cooler of beer, and hit the road. When we got to the trailhead, it was just a gravel pull-off beside a faded sign half covered in moss. No other cars, no people. The trail itself was a mess, overgrown with brambles, roots snaking across the path, like it hadn't seen a ranger in decades. Still, we slung on our packs and started hiking. By late afternoon, we reached the campsite. It was a flat, stony patch on a ridge, with a steep drop-off on one side overlooking miles of rolling forest. The air was crisp, the kind that smells like pine and earth, and it was dead quiet. No birds, no wind, just us. We pitched our tents, cracked a couple beers, and got settled. Sam was fiddling with his fancy new camp stove while I wandered over to the edge of the ridge to take in the view. The sun was dipping low, painting the trees gold, when I caught something moving down in the valley below. Through the thick canopy, I could just make out shapes, maybe 3 or 4 people, walking single file. They were too far to see clearly, just dark blurs weaving between the pines. I squinted, wondering if they were hunters or lost hikers, but they didn't seem to have packs or gear. I called Sam over, but by the time he shuffled up, they'd vanished into the shadows. We shrugged it off and went back to our setup. The rest of the evening was chill, cooking hot dogs over a fire, swapping stories about work and old college days. Night fell fast, the kind of dark that swallows everything outside the firelight. Around 10 p.m., we were roasting marshmallows when we heard it. Voices, low, muffled, like a conversation drifting through the trees. We both froze, straining to listen. It wasn't close, maybe 100 yards out, but it was definitely multiple people. 2, maybe 3, talking in a short bursts. We couldn't catch words, just the rhythm of it, rising and falling. It didn't sound like English, but it was hard to tell with the distance and the crackling fire. "Dude, you hear that?" Sam whispered, his eyes wide. I nodded, scanning the blackness beyond the fire. The voices didn't move. They just hung there, steady, like whoever it was had stopped to chat. Then, as quick as they started, they cut off. No fade, no echo, just silence. The hair on my neck stood up. We sat there waiting until a single set of footsteps crunched through the underbrush, getting louder, closer. I grabbed the hatchet from beside the fire pit, my heart thudding. A guy stepped into the glow of our firelight. He was tall, wiry, wearing a beat-up denim jacket and a faded trucker hat with some gas station logo on it. His beard was scruffy, and he grinned like he'd just found old friends. "Hey, y'all," he said, his voice thick with a southern drawl that didn't quite fit up here in New York. "Trail around here's a damn maze. You know the way back to the road?" I pointed west, where we'd come from, and he nodded, but he didn't move. Feeling uneasy, I asked, "You with those folks we heard out there?" His grin faltered, just for a second, then snapped back. "Ain't seen nobody else," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Been solo all day. Wish I'd run into him. Coulda asked him the way out myself." It didn't add up. He'd come straight from where the voices were, and there's no way he hadn't heard them. They were loud enough to carry. Sam shot me a look, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing. This guy was full of it. But why lie? He tipped his hat, said, "Thanks, boys," and ambled off toward the trail, disappearing into the dark. We sat there tense, picking apart what just happened. "He's got to be with them," Sam muttered. "No way he didn't hear that." I agreed, but the bigger question gnawed at me. What were they doing out here? And why hide it? For the next half hour, we stayed by the fire, voices low, nerves fraying. The woods felt different now, too still, like something was holding its breath. I kept glancing at the trail, half expecting that guy to pop back out. The fire was dying down when Sam finally said, "Man, I don't like this. Let's bail." I didn't argue. We started breaking camp, stuffing gear into our packs as fast as we could. The unease was thick, like a weight pressing down on us. Just as we doused the fire with a hiss of smoke, a twig snapped behind us. Close, deliberate. We spun around. The embers were out, and the dark was absolute. No crickets, no wind, just dead silence. My hand shook as I fished my flashlight from my pack and flicked it on. There he was, the trucker hat guy, standing maybe 20 feet away, dead still, staring at us. His grin was gone, replaced by a blank, hollow look, like he wasn't even blinking. The beam shook in my grip as I held it on him. Then from the trees on either side, more footsteps, fast, heavy, closing in. "Run!" Sam yelled. We bolted for the trail, packs bouncing, branches clawing at our arms. Behind us, the woods erupted, multiple sets of feet crashing through the brush, some trailing us on the path, others flanking us through the trees. I didn't dare look back, just kept running, lungs burning, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The sounds chased us for what felt like miles, then slowly tapered off, fading into the night. We didn't stop until we hit the gravel pull-off, scrambled into the truck and peeled out, tires spitting dirt. We didn't talk much on the drive back, just sat there, breathing hard, replaying it in our heads. The next day, I looked up that campsite again. Buried in an old forum post, I found a hiker's comment from years back. They'd seen weird folks wandering the valley at night, never getting close, just watching. No one ever figured out who they were. Locals, squatters, something else. Sam and I haven't camped since. Last week, though, I got a text from a number I didn't know. "Nice spot. Come back soon." I haven't shown it to Sam yet. Not sure I will. It was early March 2023, and I was a 25-year-old guy fresh out of grad school, driving cross-country from Colorado to visit my folks in Ohio. I'd always loved road trips. Something about the open road, a good playlist, and a bag of beef jerky just beat flying every time. Spring had come early that year, so I figured it'd be a smooth ride, even if it meant 2 days of hauling through the Midwest's endless flatlands. I didn't have a strict plan, just a vague idea of crashing at some cheap motel halfway through. I hit the road on a Wednesday morning, leaving Denver at dawn with a full tank and a thermos of coffee. I drove for nearly 11 hours, stopping only for gas and a greasy burger at some diner off Aussie 70. By 9 p.m., I was beat. The highway stretched out dark and empty, just me and the occasional semi-rumbling past. At the next exit, a lonely gas station glowing like a beacon in the plains. I pulled over, topped off the tank, and opened my phone to find a place to crash. The nearest motel was 15 miles off the main road, down some county route cutting through farmland. The reviews were sparse, calling it basic and quiet, which was fine by me. I punched it into the GPS and turned off the highway onto a narrow potholed road. No streetlights, just my headlights slicing through the dark, cornfields looming on both sides. After about 10 minutes, I rolled into a tiny town. More like a ghost town, really. A handful of sagging houses, a shuttered general store, and at the end of the main drag, the motel. A squat single-story building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that read Prairie Rest. The parking lot was deserted, not a single car. I grabbed my duffel bag and headed inside. The lobby was a time capsule, faded floral wallpaper, a musty smell, and a couple of bulbs casting weak yellowish light. No one was at the desk. I stood there, shifting my weight, listening to the silence. No hum of a TV, no chatter, just the faint whistle of wind sneaking through the cracks. Finally, a guy shuffled out from a back room, middle-aged, balding, with a flannel shirt and a tired look. He blinked at me like I'd woken him up, then muttered a greeting and checked me in. He handed me a key for room 12, the last one down the hall. I thanked him and trudged off. The room was what I expected: a lumpy bed, a chipped dresser, and a small armchair by a window with drawn curtains. I dropped my bag, flopped into the chair, and scrolled through my phone, too wired to sleep yet. The Wi-Fi was spotty, so I stuck to offline podcasts, letting the drone of some true crime narrator fill the quiet. I must have dozed off because I jolted awake to a loud bang, bang, bang on the door. My phone slid off my lap, the screen showing 11:30 p.m. Heart racing, I stumbled to my feet and crossed the room, flipping on the light. I cracked the door open. Nothing. The hallway stretched out empty, dimly lit by a single bulb flickering at the far end. I stepped out, peering both ways, but it was dead still. Shaking it off as a dream, or maybe the wind rattling something, I went back inside, locked the door, and hit the shower. The hot water helped, and by midnight I was in bed, alarm set for 7 a.m. Another long drive waited tomorrow. Sleep came fast, but not for long. At some ungodly hour, 2 a.m., according to the bedside clock, another round of banging yanked me awake. This time, it was harder, insistent, like someone was pissed. I shot up, the room pitch black except for a thin strip of light under the door. I didn't hesitate, rushed over and flung it open. Empty again. The hall was silent, but the air felt heavy. Wrong. Fed up, I grabbed my phone and marched to the front desk. The clerk was still there, slouched behind the counter, reading a paperback. I told him about the knocking, asked if he'd seen anyone wandering around. He frowned, setting the book down. "You're the only one here tonight, bud," he said, scratching his head. "Ain't nobody else checked in. Haven't seen a soul." I forced a laugh, mumbled something about being tired, and headed back. His words stuck with me, though. If I was alone, who the hell was banging on my door? Back in the room, I double-checked the lock, added the chain for good measure, and climbed into bed. Sleep wasn't coming easy now. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in. To calm down, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen flared to life, and in that brief glow, I saw it, a figure standing in the corner by the dresser, tall and still, just a silhouette against the wall. I scrambled back, nearly falling off the bed, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, just stood there watching. I fumbled for the light switch, but my hands were shaking too bad to find it. The phone slipped, hitting the floor, and in the dark I heard footsteps, slow at first, then fast, charging toward me. I lunged for the door, fingers slipping on the chain, heart hammering as the steps closed in. Finally, I got it open and bolted down the hall, bare feet slapping the carpet. I burst into the lobby, where the clerk shot up from his chair, eyes wide. "Call the cops!" I yelled, spinning around just as a man tore into the room behind me. Tall, wiry, in a dark hoodie. He froze for a second, then darted past us, shoving the front door open and vanishing into the night. The clerk was already on the phone with 911, stammering about an intruder. Cops showed up 20 minutes later, 2 deputies with flashlights and skeptical looks. They searched the place, found nothing but a busted lock on a side entrance nobody used. The motel's cameras, one in the lobby, one by the sign, caught the guy slipping in after I'd first gone to the desk, but his hood kept his face hidden. The clerk swore he'd never seen him, insisted I was the only guest. Best guess? He'd been squatting in the empty rooms, maybe watching me from the start. They couldn't say why he'd targeted me, or if he even had a reason. I grabbed my stuff and peeled out of there at 3 a.m., driving straight through to Ohio with the radio cranked to stay awake. Months later, I got a random text from an unknown number. "Quiet night, huh?" I blocked it and never told my folks. Still don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I haven't taken that route since.